Tony Taylor wants to show you how he pounded out 2,000 hits. The 1970 Tony Taylor baseball card is not shooting straight with you. Not completely. And not right up front. Now, don't get me wrong. It's a gorgeous card. A tremendous card. In fact, when you first stumble across the card, it might take your breath away, just for a beat. Hailing from an era when hatless coifs, bad airbrush jobs, silly poses, and dingy photos abound, this beauty sticks out like John Crook in the batting box against Randy Johnson. Tony Taylor stands in front of a bright bank of Philadelphia Phillies hats and wooden baseball bats across a wide spectrum of color tones, having just selected a hunk of lumber to accompany him on his next trip to the plate. The design is clean, and the photo is crisp enough to make even the ancient dugout phone in the background seem more contemporary somehow. There's a lot happening in this picture, to be sure, but there's so much pure baseball going on that you just want to stare at it for hours. But there's something else going on here, too. Tony Taylor and Topps seem to be telling you something about the player himself. Take another look, and you'll see. Taylor has a death grip on his bat, and it couldn't break free even if it wanted to. It doesn't even really matter how Taylor grabs a bat, because he can fling it around using whatever haphazard grip he ends up with. Taylor is kind of hulked forward a bit, like he's ready to step into a club swing to take care of whatever troubles might be emerging in front of him. Taylor's left arm hangs to his side, almost out of frame, but you can see that he has some swole in that bicep. Taylor wears a batting glove on his left hand, ready for some sting. Taylor's hat is pushed back on his head, granting the sun full access to a scowl that's developing on his face. He wants to know if you're seriously pointing that blankety-blank camera at him. Viewed in one shot, especially the first shot, and maybe with a bit of a squint, this is the card of a slugger. Bookend match is card number 40 of teammate Richie Allen. But then you notice Taylor's position is listed as 2B, 3B. Today's third baseman might hit dingers at a decent pace, but in the late 1960s and early 1970s, BS or before Schmitty, home runs weren't the name of the game at the hot corner. And second baseman? They were just middle infielders, unless they were Joe Morgan, or Davy Johnson, or Bobby Grinch, or Dave Lopes, or... The point is, no power-hitting second or third baseman was likely to sneak through nearly 50 years on the front of a card this good-looking, without said cardboard becoming a classic. And the number of Tony Taylor Master Collection want lists floating around out there is probably fairly small as we start the new decade. He's just not a legend at the same way that Mike Schmidt or Brian Taylor or Oscar Gamble is a legend. In fact, unless you grew up following the Phillies or were a pretty hardcore baseball fan up through the middle 1970s, well, you might not even know who Tony Taylor is. But that doesn't mean Taylor isn't worth learning about, because he is. So you flip the card over, where you learn that by 1970, Taylor had already logged enough major league and minor league service time to make his stats box big and crowded. So expansive was his record, in fact, that Topps deprived collectors of one of those nifty 1970 cartoons just to fit in all of Tony's good stuff. At that point, with the 69 season in the bag, the good stuff included more than 1,600 hits and north of 800 runs, and 1,600 plus games spread across 12 seasons. Taylor had also accumulated 229 doubles and 66 triples, which spoke to his speed. So does the blurb at the top of the card. Leader of 2 loops and triples, Tony also led the league with 38 stolen bases in 1955, first on Phil's with 19 swipes in 1969. And if we cruise over to his baseball reference page, we can see that eventually those legs brought 234 steals over the course of 19 big league seasons. His other career totals include 298 doubles, 86 triples, 1,005 runs, and 2,007 hits. All of that is pretty amazing when you consider that he began his professional career at the age of 18 in 1954, when the New York Giants signed him and sent him down to the Texas City Thibodeau Pilots of the old Evangeline League, and that he spent 3 more years after that without a sniff of the majors. The big break came in December of 1957, though, when the Chicago Cubs picked Taylor out of the Rule 5 draft. That meant that they had to keep him on the roster all season long in 1958 or send him back to the then San Francisco Giants. The Cubs didn't just stick Taylor in the dark corner of a dugout that summer, however. Instead, manager Bob Sheffing handed him a starting second base job, and the 22-year-old responded with 21 steals and 63 runs to bolster a weak .235 batting average. The youngster also showed a decent eye at the plate by drawing 40 walks, and he played at roughly league level in the field. Taylor held on to his job in 1959 and improved his numbers pretty much across the board. He entered 1960 as a young veteran with plenty of good years ahead of him. And the Philadelphia Phillies, they took notice. On May 13th, the Phils sent Ed Boucher and Don Cardwell to the Cubs in exchange for the speedy middle infielder. In Philly, Taylor became an all-star in 1960, and a key part of the club that would eventually break the city's heart with a late collapse in 1964. A year before that, Taylor had logged career heights with 102 runs and 10 triples, adding 23 steals for good measure. That performance earned him a few MVP votes. He plugged away for the Phils for the parts of 12 years until a trade sent him to the Detroit Tigers for Carl Cavanaugh and Michael Furmuth on June 12, 1971. At that point, Taylor was 35 years old, but hit a career best for a full season, .301 in 1970. Still, with little glitz and an aging body, he wasn't the type of player you built a team around. So no one was surprised when his playing time dipped to 55 games in the Motor City that summer. He played in 91 total contests between the two clubs. In 1972, Taylor made the most of his 78 games by batting .303, but slid all the way down to .229 in 1973. After the Tigers released him that December, Philadelphia decided to take another shot at their former infielder. Taylor found a little-known offshoot of the Fountain of Youth in the corner of the Phillies clubhouse and batted .328 in 62 appearances in 1974. That performance brought him a bump in playing time to 79 games in 1975, and he capped his career by hitting .261 over 26 plate appearances for the Bicentennial Phillies in 1976. When Philadelphia released Taylor in November of that year, his 19-year run with the big leagues was done. It was a really good run, though, and a long one, and we might have missed it or forgotten about it if not for that wonderful 1970 Topps card. You know the one, right? It's the one where Tony Taylor is doing his Slugger at the rack impression. Oh, yeah, about that. Taylor ended up with 75 home runs, including a career best of 9 in 1970. Maybe he felt that spike coming when Topps asked him to stop for the camera the year before. Or maybe the photographer annoyed him to such a degree that a Hulk-sized surge of anger poured over him and infused his muscles with a 34-year-old burst of power. Whatever the case, Tony Taylor looked right at home, surrounded in the baseball lumber, and he knew how to coax some hits out of those bats, power or not.